The Mystery of the Missing Necklace, Chapter 13, In Mr. Goon's Clutches. The children were full of excitement when they heard Fatty say this. What? Go down to the waxworks and attend the gang meeting? Said Larry. You wouldn't dare. You would be discovered, however well you hid yourself. It's the only way of finding out who all the gang are, said Fatty. I shall see them, hear them talk and plan. My word, this is a bit of luck. No wonder Mr. Goon wanted to get hold of that cigarette from the old man, said Daisy. He would give anything to have this message. He'll wonder what the old chap's done with it, said Fatty with a grin. He'll have searched him from top to toe, but he won't have found that cigarette. They talked excitedly for some time, and then Fatty said he really must go home and get out of his hot, smelly old man clothes. The others walked down to the gate with him, leaving an angry Buster tied up in the summer house. Meanwhile, Mr. Goon had had a most disappointing time. He had found no cigarette at all on the old man. He was angry and puzzled, and he shouted at the old fellow, getting redder and redder in the face. You can stay here till you tell me what you did with the cigarette. See, he yelled. I'll lock you up till you do. Now then, are you going to tell me? The old chap had turned sulky. He knew nothing of any cigarette. He hadn't been sitting on the bench. He didn't know what the bad-tempered policeman was talking about. So he sulked and said nothing at all, which made Goon madder than ever. Right, said Goon at last, getting up. I'll talk to you some more tomorrow. He went home and changed into his uniform. Then he decided to go and see that boy Larry and ask him if he too had noticed the man giving the old fellow a cigarette that afternoon. Mr. Goon couldn't help being puzzled by the old chap's firm denials of any knowledge of a cigarette. But Larry must have seen the gift. He would bear witness to it. But Larry was out. Try at the Hiltons, said Larry's mother. Oh, I do hope the children haven't been misbehaving themselves, Mr. Goon. No, for a wonder. No, ma'am, said Mr. Goon, and went off majestically. He arrived at Pip's just as the children were escorting Fatty, still disguised as the old man, out of the iron gate. Fatty stared at Mr. Goon, and Mr. Goon stared back disbelievingly. What? Hadn't he just locked that old man up? And here he was again, free and walking about. Mr. Goon began to feel as if he was in a peculiarly unpleasant dream. Good evening, Mr. Goon, said Larry. Mr. Goon took no notice of him. Here, you, he said, grabbing at Fatty's arm. How did you get out? Haven't I just locked you up? What are things coming to? I would like to know. Here I have just locked you up and I meet you walking into me, bold as brass. Mr. Goon looked so amazed and disbelieving that Fatty badly wanted to laugh. He was at a loss to know what to say. What's that? He said at last, putting his hand behind his ear. That was too much for Mr. Goon. He caught hold of Fatty's collar and marched him quickly up the lane. You've been wassatting me long enough, said the annoyed Mr. Goon. I don't know how you got out, but I do know you're going in again. And this time I'll lock the door on you myself. And there you will stay till you see sense if it takes you a month. Fatty didn't like this at all. He debated whether or not to tell Mr. Goon the secret of his disguise. But before he had made up his mind, he was at the police station. Mr. Goon was unlocking a door, and Fatty was being pushed into the dark, narrow little room behind. And in it was the real old man. He stared at Fatty, and Fatty stared at him. The old chap let out a howl. He was beginning to feel he must be mad. Why, he was himself staring at him. What was happening? Mr. Goon heard the howl and looked into the room, and then he saw the two old men, exactly alike, as like as peas in a pod. Mr. Goon sat down heavily on a chair and mopped his forehead with a big handkerchief. He felt dazed. What with vanishing cigarettes, man that got locked up and then got out, and now two old men exactly alike. Well, Mr. Goon began to feel that he must be lying asleep and dreaming in his own bed at home, and he fervently hoped that he would soon wake up. "Let me get out of here," said the real old man, and tried to push past Mr. Goon. But the policeman caught hold of him. He wasn't going to have any more disappearings. He was going to get to the bottom of things. Fatty saw that things had gone far enough, and he did not like the thought of his parents knowing that he was locked up at the police station. So he spoke to Mr. Goon in his ordinary voice and gave that poor man another terrible shock. "Mr. Goon, I'm not really an old man. I am Frederick Trotwell." Mr. Goon's mouth fell open. He gulped once or twice, staring at Fatty as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Fatty twitched off his beard, and then Mr. Goon did indeed see that it was Fatty. He dragged him out of the dark little room, slammed and locked the door, and took Fatty into the office. "Now you just tell me the meaning of all this here," he said. "Well," said Fatty, "it's a long story, but I'll tell you everything, Mr. Goon." And he launched into the tale of all that the find-outers had done, and how he had disguised himself as the old man and sat there to trap a message from the gang. "What about that cigarette?" said Mr. Goon when he had got his breath back a bit. "What about that? That's the most important thing." "Is it really?" said Fatty in pretended surprise. "Well, we undid the cigarette, of course, Mr. Goon, and inside we found nothing of importance at all, really, just a silly grocery list. We were terribly disappointed." Fatty did not mean to tell Mr. Goon what he and the others had discovered in the message, the few lines in secret ink. No, he would keep that to himself and go to the meeting on Tuesday night and see what he could find out. He wanted to solve the mystery. He, Fatty, the chief of the find-outers. He did not stop to think whether it was dangerous or not. Mr. Goon grabbed hold of the message. He spread it out. He frowned. He read it through 2 or 3 times. "Must be a code," he said. "I'll look up my code book. You leave this to me." Well, I'll be going now," said Fatty, after watching Mr. Goon frowning at the list of groceries for a few minutes. "If you hadn't given me this here bit of paper, I would have locked you up," said Mr. Goon. "Interfering with the law, that's what you're always doing, you 5 kids. Oh yes, I know you think you have got a fine friend in Inspector Jenks, but one of these days you will find he is fed up with you, see? And I'll get my promotion and be a big noise, and then just you look out." "Oh, I will look out," said Fatty earnestly. "Thanks for warning me, Mr. Goon. What about that old fellow? Are you still going to keep him locked up?" "Yes, I am," said Mr. Goon. "And your own common sense will tell you why. That's always supposing you have got any, which I very much doubt. I don't want him warning the gang that I am on their track. If he is here under my nose, he can't do much warning." "I think you're quite right, Mr. Goon," said Fatty solemnly. "I couldn't agree with you more, I think." "I'm tired of you," said Mr. Goon. "You clear off double quick before I change my mind about locking you up. I'm sick and tired of you messing about, interfering, dressing up. Ha!" Fatty scuttled off. He went home and quickly changed out of his old man clothes and then shot up to Pip's to tell everyone what had happened. "I had to give him the cigarette message. Worse luck," he said. "It was the only thing to keep him quiet. But I don't believe he'll make a head or tail of it. And I bet he won't test it for a secret message as we did. You should have seen his face when he pushed me into the same room as the real old man and saw 2 of us there. I thought he would go up in smoke." The others roared. They were most relieved to see Fatty back safe and sound. Bats had been imagining him locked up in a dreary cell with only bread and water. "He's keeping the old man under his eye for a few days," said Fatty, "in case he gets the wind up about all this and warns the other members of the gang. I'm pleased he's doing that. I expect the meeting will wonder why number 3 doesn't turn up on Tuesday. Whoever he is, well, they'll have to wonder." I think it's awfully dangerous for you to go down to the waxworks on Tuesday, said Daisy. I do, really. I think you ought to go and tell the inspector about it, Fatty. Oh no, said Fatty. I want us to solve this mystery before we see the inspector again. I shall be quite safe. I don't see how you can say that, said Larry, who agreed with Daisy that it might be dangerous. The men will surely not be fools enough to hold their meeting without being certain there is no spy there. They won't discover me, said Fatty. I shall wear a disguise. I don't see how that will help you, said Larry. Even if you are in a disguise, you'll be a stranger to the men, and they'll want to know who you are. I shan't be a stranger to them, said Fatty exasperatingly. Nor to you either. The others stared at him. What do you mean? Said Pip at last. What are you getting at? I shall be somebody the gang have seen often enough before. If they have held their other meetings in the waxworks hall, they'll know me so well they won't even look at me. What do you mean? Said Daisy, getting annoyed. Don't talk in these silly riddles. Well, said Fatty, and he lowered his voice to a mysterious whisper. Well, I shall be disguised as one of the waxworks, silly. Napoleon, I think, because he suits me most. There was a complete silence. All the find-outers stared at Fatty in the greatest admiration. What an idea! No member of the gang would suspect any of the waxwork figures. Bets could just imagine Fatty standing stiff and straight as the waxwork Napoleon staring fixedly in front of him, seeing and hearing everything. What a really marvelous idea, said Larry at last. Oh, Fatty, I should never have thought of that if I had thought for a month. You'll be right in the lion's den and they won't even smell you. It's rather a good idea, isn't it? Said Fatty, swelling up a little. That's one thing about me. I've always got plenty of ideas. My form master said only last term that my imagination was. But the others didn't in the least want to hear what Fatty's form master had said. They wanted to talk about Tuesday night and what Fatty was going to do. Tuesday night. Bets thrilled every time she thought of it. This mystery was really getting too exciting for words. Oh, Tuesday night.